gonna get started on today's class. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to, I think we got maybe like half new folks who've never been to a Mastery Monday before. This is our 13th Mastery Monday. So for the new folks, we've got all the recordings of past ones just in case. But yeah, just stop me if you have any questions. Today, I was gonna cover turn and river strategy, but I realized I needed to cover a bit more on just like general future planning first, before we kind of go deeper into probably a dedicated session for turn and river. We've already covered, for those who are new, we've covered pre-flop before, we've covered flop strategy. So you can go through past recordings, but there's so much to go into every single street in the game tree of poker, so we're definitely going to be revisiting those as well in the future. So just quick recap of what the last one I did, which was 2 weeks ago now. We talked about the different types of flops, bet sizing heuristics, a couple key concepts like range advantage, nut advantage. I'm just going to give a quick overview of these things just as a quick refresher as we go into kind of future planning. So basically some basic terms on flop types that are really good to understand is dry/static flops, which is basically disconnected boards like ace, 7-3, rainbow, right? So disconnected, there's not many draws available. It's kind of like dry/static. Wet/dynamic is kind of like 4-5-6, 2 diamonds is generally like a wet flop. And then this concept of range advantage and nut advantage, which is basically when someone has the range advantage, it just means their range of hands that they could be playing in that specific node is stronger than the opponent's range of hands that they could be playing. So for example, the pre-flop aggressor is generally going to have a lot more of the Broadway cards like ace, king, queen, jack, etc. So when you have a flop that has any of those Broadway cards, generally the pre-flop raiser is going to have the range advantage over whoever just called pre-flop. So that's range advantage, and then nut advantage, which is similar to range advantage but slightly different, where it's purely just who has more like nutted hands. So on like a board like 5, 6, 7, 2 diamonds or something like that, like the pre-flop caller might have more nutted hands like sets, 2 pairs, straights, because they're going to have a lot more of the lower cards that connect with that board, even though the pre-flop raiser would have the overall range advantage because they have more overpairs, like aces, kings, queens, that still have strong equity on that board. They just have fewer of the nuts because they don't have as many offsuit 2 pairs. They'll still probably have some sets, but anyways, those were the general concepts we went over last time. And any questions about that? Is this like very, very new to anyone? Because I know I'm going through this pretty quickly, but okay, sounds like we're pretty good here. So coming up is really thinking about future planning. And because this happens a lot, especially with recreational players, is like, okay, I've studied flops, I know, okay, dry flop, I'm supposed to bet small a lot of time, and then people have just like no idea what to do on the turn, or no idea what to do on the river, or they just don't think about it until they actually get to the turn and the river, and they're like, oh, now I have 2 pair, or I still have nothing, but I have maybe a flush draw. Do I bet? Do I not? And so a lot of recreational players are asking themselves these questions in real time, but really what you want to be doing in poker is actually like literally planning out the entire progression of the hand and knowing what you should be doing, what sizes you're going to be betting for, how often you're going to be betting, depending on which card comes out, and knowing whether a card is good for your range or good for your opponent's range. So this is really critical to turn and river strategy once you get down to future streets. And when I get a lot of questions from recreational players, I notice a lot of like not a lot of thought going into like this future planning. It's just like, okay, I bet big on the turn, but like I don't know how well that performed relative to why I bet big compared to like betting small on the flop. So there's not a lot of continuation or thinking about that. So we'll talk about some concepts that get you into future planning and what are the key things to consider. Stack to pot ratio, which I'll just cover as a key kind of sort of like mathematical concept because it will influence your ability to future plan. So in essence, if your stack to pot ratio is too low, then you don't actually have as much future planning to do. You might be playing a hand for only 2 streets or even 1 street as opposed to 3 streets. So it's really good to know this quick math. And then absolute versus relative hand strength, and then geometric betting. Yeah, these are the core concepts we'll cover today. So first is the primary strategic goal. So everything we cover today is primarily going to be how do you maximize value. And that's your primary strategic goal. Like maybe each of you guys are playing like you just want to like come and like pull off the sickest bluff against a player and just like and then show like 7 deuce, but like which feels fantastic, but is generally not how you make your money in poker. Like solid players are just really good at getting value with their good hands. And you're going to have some bluffs, of course, but the frequency of how often you're going to be bluffing and finding that spot to bluff is going to be far fewer than, like, when you're playing with value, it's pretty clear, like, you want to get the most money, and how do you plan accordingly so you get the most money. So that's going to be the focus of today. We're probably going to have a separate session entirely on bluffing. Yeah, basically, when you have the nuts, you have a really good hand, how do you plan so that you get all the money in by the river? So what do you think the questions are to ask yourself when you are trying to get all the money in? What are the concepts to consider when, let's say, I don't know, you raise pre-flop, like, you know, the pre-flop charts, let's say you raise pre-flop in a center spot with ace-king, you get to a flop that's like ace-king-queen or something like that. Like, what are the things that you want to consider to try to get all the money in?
Opponent's range?
Yep. What's the opponent's range? Can they call? Like, what are the hands that they can call? What are there hands that can call in this, like, formation? Yeah.
Pot size, your stack.
Yep, exactly. Pot size, large stack. So effectively that gets all rolled up into stack to pot ratio, which we'll show a calculation for.
Board texture, whether it's dry or wet.
Yes, board texture is really important. So wet or dry board, who's got, you know, range advantage, nut advantage depending on the board. Yeah. Anything else?
What are, like, cards you can continue on turns and rivers?
Yeah, so like what cards are good for my range on turn, what cards are good on the river, and then related to board texture, will whoever has the best hand, will that change often by the river depending on what the board is right now? So yeah, you guys covered a lot of them. I mean, also, do I have position on my opponent as well, which is really important. Something we covered in like the very first lecture is like the most profitable formation in poker is when you're heads up and you're in position, because that's where most of your win rate's going to come, because that's most of your win rate's going to come because that's where you can extract the most value. You'll have a very good base, like your opponent's always going to act first before you, so you'll generally have a decent idea of like how capped their range can be, so you know if you can go for thin value or max value, and you'll just have a lot of advantage to be able to extract the most value. So do you have position? What's the stack to pot ratio? Can worse hands call all three streets? If we're going to try to bet for all three streets, is it possible for worse hands to even call? And then what's the absolute value of my hand? What's the relative value of my hand? And this has a lot to do with board texture. You know, like 2-pair on a super wet board might not have, is great absolute value, but might not be great relative value depending on what's on the board. So these are the general concepts to consider when you start to think about future planning. And the more you guys do this kind of off the table as well, it makes it come more naturally when you are playing on the table. So first is just kind of like a quick primer on stack to pot ratio for anyone that's new to this concept. Is basically just what's the effective stack size, and you divide it by the pot size, and we're just going to say that on the flop. So example, let's say, you know, two players, we both start with $100 pre-flop. I'm on the button, we're playing 1-2. I raise to $10 pre-flop on the button, and then big blind calls for $10 from the big blind. So basically, the pot after the flop is $10 plus 10 plus the $1 small blind. So it's 21 in the pot, and we have $90 behind because we started with 100. So this is a stack to pot ratio of 4.3. So that's just very simple calculation. It's a very important one to be aware of, both, you know, pre-flop, like if I'm going to raise for a certain size, what's my SPR going to be on the flop, but then also on the subsequent streets. And I'll give you guys a couple quick guidelines as well based on what the SPR is and how that should dictate some of your future planning. But basically, if the SPR is less than 2, then you're just playing for stacks. With any of your value hands that's like top pair or better, you're just playing for stacks. Like your hand is good enough relative to like the SPR. This just dictates you're gonna want to get all the money in, one way or another. And then if you have SPR between 3 to 6, and this is all on the flop, by the way, then you've got like medium SPR. So this is where you have to really consider more like hand strength relative, like what's your relative hand strength on the run out. You generally will want 2-pair or better to play for stacks. And this is actually a big mistake I see from recreational players, is they go for 3 streets of value with just top pair. Generally speaking, and especially when you're playing like against like really well-studied players, like you're not going to be wanting to do that. They're not going to be, just because it's very vulnerable, and you're going to be getting like check raised a ton or getting put into like 6 spots. So top pair is just not strong enough to go for 3 streets of value when you have medium or high SPR. And then when SPR is higher than 7, you're playing pretty deep, and generally here you're only going to want to go for 3 streets when you're pretty nutted or you have nut blockers. So you have like the nut flush or the nut straight. and you want to be playing for pot control, especially with your hands like top pair or even two pair sometimes. Like you'll want to check back depending on the run out, but you want to generally prefer the nuts if you're going for 3 streets when SPR is this deep. Any questions on this concept? SPR pretty straightforward. Okay. Yes.
Does it like differ based on how many players there are in the pot?
So I would say no, it doesn't differ depending on how many players in the pot. When you start to play multi-way, like if you raise 10 and like 3 or 4 other people called, the main thing is now like SPR is going to be a lot shallower because the pot gets inflated a lot faster, and if people bet on the flop when you get 3 to 4 more callers, it really starts to inflate and reduce SPR. But the SPR concept will still apply. Like if you've got SPR less than 2 and there's 5 people in the pot and you've got top pair, like you're still probably going to just get it in. And it's going to suck a lot of time because like, you know, you're playing against like 4 different ranges. But this will come back to really the goal of like, we talked about it previously, like why you want to be 3-betting, 4-betting pre-flop, because you want to generate like a heads up formation. Like you generally don't want to be playing multi-ways post-flop because it's just a hard spot. Like it's a hard formation to win it. When you're playing, even if when you have aces, but you're playing against like 4 random hands, like you still don't have the equity advantage against like 4 random hands. But this concept still applies even multi-way.
Do you consider like theirs or yours, or which one do you prioritize?
You take the SPR is always using the effective stack size, meaning whatever the lowest stack is. So like even if you have 500 in your stack, but your opponent has 100 and there's 20 in the pot, the SPR is 5. You don't take yours.
It's the lowest.
Yeah. So if there's like 5 people in the pot, you would generally take the lowest. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So these are the implications of SPR on future planning, which is if SPR is 2 or less, you only have a 2-street hand. If you have like a value hand, like top pair, top kicker, or 2 pair or something like that, you only have a 2-street hand, not 3 streets. So you should plan accordingly. You might want to size up on the flop and then go for like a pot size bet on the turn, or check back the turn and like and then go for a pot size bet on the river. But generally, you're just going to only have 2 streets of value. So this is where SPR really dictates your ability to future plan, because it really simplifies it when your SPR is lower. Whereas if you have anything SPR over 2, then you have some flexibility where you can go for 3 streets of value. So these are just like some general rule of thumb based on SPR that really simplifies your future planning. So absolute versus relative hand strength, and I'll give just like one example. I kind of already touched on this slightly, but so this is the board that we got on the turn. And so first off, absolute versus relative hand strength. Absolute hand strength is just like, what is the value of my, like literally like my exact hand? Like, do I have 2 pair? Do I have trips? Do I have a set? Same thing, set, straight, or flush. But then relative hand strength is how strong is my hand relative to the range of hands that my opponent could have to get here. So, I mean, what do you guys think is, I mean, this one's pretty clear, but like, what do you think is like the absolute value of our hand here? 2 pair. Yeah, so literally it's 2 pair, and like generally 2 pair is pretty good. So it's, you know, pretty medium to medium high. And then what do you guys think the relative value of our hand is on this board?
Low.
Yeah, it's quite low. Like really, you've got like a bluff catcher if your opponent decides to bet. If they're betting for anything for value, they've got straights, they've got flushes, and like it's not really a great hand. You want to be really playing for pot control and not get into a big pot with this. Obviously, you've got some outs to like to a full house where you could be completely crushing, but so you don't necessarily want to fold, but you want to play pretty cautiously. Conversely, what's the absolute value of our hand on this board when we have ace-9 on 9 deuce deuce 3? Yeah, so we've got 2 pair again, but do you guys think this is like strong, like high up? Yeah, so now when we think about relative value, do you guys think this is high relative value, medium, low? Then someone's at the door.
Medium.
Yeah, you only lose to pocket pairs.
I think it's relatively strong.
Yeah.
Plus, you got a blocker as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a relatively strong hand, right? On this particular board, even though technically, let's say that 2 were not a 2, like I don't know, make it like a 7 or something. So as we don't have 2 pair, like our absolute value of this hand is 1 pair versus the last hand we had 2 pair. But the relative strength of our hand in this scenario is much, much higher. Like this is a hand we could go for 3 streets of value with on this sort of run out. So there are scenarios where you can go for 3 streets of value with top pair, top kicker.
Like this
Yeah.
is a missed deal, right? Two
spades.
of clubs.
Oh yes. That is a misdeal. So just like pretend that's a 7 of clubs. Pretend that's a 7 of clubs, but you guys get the idea. Relative hand strength here is quite strong. Cool. So when we are planning streets in advance, the general idea when we have a good hand is you want to kind of set up so that you can shove on the river and it's not going to be insanely high. So like a general concept is you just want to get to an SPR of about 1 on the river. So there's a $300 in the pot, we have around $300 behind. And within some margin of error, right? Like you could have, as low as like 200, or like you can have as much as like, 350, 400. But if you start to have like half SPR or lower, like there's 300 in the pot and you have 150, you're just not really setting yourself up to be able to generate any folds, especially with your bluffs, right? Like your opponent's just gonna have to kind of call all the time, just given the math and the pot odds. So you can't really effectively bluff if your SPR is too low. And if you can't effectively bluff, then you're not really balancing your range with your bluffs and your value, and you're just probably going for value too often in those kind of scenarios. So that's generally what we want to target is by the river, we're going all in. And then to get all the money in the river, there's kind of like at least 2 ways that I've been taught through my coach that you go about, which is one is kind of like you go for your standard flop sizings. So if you've got a board that favors you, like let's say ace 7 deuce rainbow, and that's a board that heavily favors you as the pre-flop, assuming we're the pre-flop aggressor, and we know that we're just supposed to range bet. So we're supposed to bet 100% of the time for a small size. And then depending on what the turn the river are, if they continue to favor us, let's say another Broadway board comes, like a Broadway card comes, like a king, then we want to continue on the turn, but we want to now figure out how we get all the money in by the river. Sometimes we'll often have to go for like an overbet on the turn and then maybe another pot size bet on the river, which can feel like kind of jarring. So then there's this other concept called like geometric betting. Who's heard of geometric betting before? Okay, just Vincent. Which is great. So then you guys are all learning something today. So geometric betting is, actually I'll go directly into the slide. It's a method of betting where you basically bet the same percentage of the pot on every street, and then so that you get it all in on the river. It's heavily favored by solvers, and it's generally going to be geared towards like a very polarizing strategy, meaning you're going to do it with your like nutted hands and you're going to do it with your best bluffs. But it's a way that you can get the money in smoothly by the river without having to think too much about bet sizing. So for example, like depending on the SPR, if I just bet 50% pot on the flop, 50% pot on the turn, 50% pot on the river, like we're all in by the river, and I just know that I can just bet that same size. And you can come up with some rules of thumb for yourself depending on what the SPR is on the flop in order to get all the money in by the river. So basically it's just a method to simplify bet planning, and I'll give one example of this, which is, so first, like you and Villain both start with $300 stacks. We're playing 1-3, so 100 big blinds to start. Pre-flop, we raise to $10 on the button. He calls in the big blind, and then so the pot after the flop, $1. We have Jack 10 of hearts, Ace King and Queen. Obviously, we smash this flop. We have the nuts. We want to get all the money in on the river, but SPR here is like 14, so it's quite high. So how are we going to structure our betting to get all the money in on the river? So this is kind of where we put in that future planning, and I think first is. I kind of answered this question for you guys, but what is the SPR, and do we think is it high enough for 3 streets of value? I think this is okay. Yes, actually, is the SPR high enough for us to go for 3 streets of value? What do you guys think?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, because we said anything above 2 SPR, then we can go for 3 streets of value. Should we bet this flop, and if so, what sizing do we use?
If we're the pre-flop raiser, yeah, we should continue, I think. And I'd probably use like a pot size bet here to start. Because if they have anything to do with this flop, it's probably strong enough to call a pot size bet, and they're probably inelastic enough to do that. If they have any bluffs, they're just gonna fold it out. You're not getting value anyway with something weaker, like with a smaller size anyway.
Okay, cool.
My thoughts.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
If you go pot, just about gets all your money in?
Yeah, so then you're thinking now in terms of geometric sizing. If we want to get all the money in, if we go pot, 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 like that's one way to get all the money in. And who knows, like theoretically, what we're supposed to do on this flop? Yes,
I have a question as a follow-up to his answer.
sure.
So if you go pot on the flop, which is I think a king or queen or any hand they have is very inelastic, and let's say turn is a brick. If we pot again, then we're folding out their inelastic hands become elastic on the turn, right? So what size would you use on the turn? If a brick comes out, let's just say like the two of diamonds, or two of hearts even. Are you still trying to target their like that portion of their range, or are you just trying to get an ace to keep holding?
Yeah, you would probably have to like size down, because like they
Yes, I'll
likely
take that.
only have like one pair.
Yep.
If you have two pair, same. Only like probably like two pairs plus would probably be called a pot size bet and things like that. So yeah, you probably have to size down in that case. But to what you're saying theoretically, I think it was that you have to bet like if it's heads up, probably about like half pot or like a smaller sizing for your entire range, especially in position.
Yeah. I think even a pot size bet on this flop, you are gonna generate some folds out of Queen X and King X. Like they don't call pure. Theoretically, this is a flop that smashes like our range as the pre-flop raiser. So we're supposed to bet small like 100% of the time. But if we bet small, it's very hard to get all the money in.
Yeah.
So this is kind of an example where you can go two ways, which is like you could bet small, like go for like 30%, 33%, like you bet $7 on the flop or $10 on the flop. But then you're gonna have to go for some like pretty hefty overbets on turns and rivers if you want to get all the money in, which you're gonna want to do with a hand like Jack 10, assuming board doesn't pair and it doesn't go like runner flush. Like if you get deuce like 5 or something offsuit, like you're gonna want to get all the money in. So this is kind of a good example where you want to consider geometric betting, but this is where like, you know, if you've like just studied flops and like you haven't done too much future planning, it's also totally fine. You just go for like, you're supposed to bet small on this, and then you're like, okay, shit, there's $40 in the pot now. I want to get all the money in. I think I just have to overbet turn, overbet river, and you kind of like, you adjust on the fly in order to get all the money in, which is totally fine. And yeah, you're probably gonna fold out like Queen X a lot of the time, but you're kind of targeting when they have like King Queen or like Queen Jack, like pair plus straight draws, or maybe they pick up like a flush draw on the turn that can't really fold even to like a pot size bet that you can get a ton of value from. Yeah, do you have a question?
Depending on, I guess, who you're in with, are you ever checking that?
You
Like,
should.
depending who?
You should never be checking on this flop. I mean, even ignoring for your hand, like what your exact hand is here right now. If you're raising pre-flop on the button and they're just calling out the big blind, you have such a strong range advantage here. Like even for all your hands that miss, like I don't know, like 10-9. I mean 10-9 still has like a straight draw, but like 9-8 suited or like I don't know, you're like you're really vulnerable like under pairs, like pocket fives. Like you just want to be betting. Theoretically, you want to be betting this 100% of the time. This kind of board.
What if you're like out of position and you know your opponent's like a lag or a maniac, and you know that they're not there? Or
Yeah,
very
so that's different. If you just called out of the big blind with Jack 10, then you're checking 100% of the time because
Oh,
you're
I
expecting
see.
them. They're supposed to be betting 100% of the time.
Oh, okay.
And then I would check raise. I would just check raise on the flop. Yeah.
Are you check raising huge to balance SPR, or are you checking raise small?
It will depend on SPR. So I'll be kind of doing some math to think about okay how. I mean, I don't want to necessarily vary my check raise sizing too much. So I'll always think like, okay, what's my like standard check raise size? It's somewhere between like 3 to 4x, right? Or something like that. And maybe go bigger if it's like a really splashy game. But then I think about like, if I had like 600 behind or something, I'm playing against like a calling station or something that's just going to call with every like one pair or even like a Jack X, so like his straight draws, then I might go bigger, like 5 to 6x and adjust more exploitatively. And also because I have so much behind and I want to be able to go big on the turn and big on the river and get all the money in. But otherwise, I'll always kind of like just default to like a more standard check raise size first, like usually like 4x. Yeah, and then kind of adjust from there based on the dynamics of the game.
Sorry, back to maths. Like,
Yes.
Is there like an easy maths equation that like helps you calculate the minimum geometric betting size. That after knowing effective stack size and flop pot to like get it all in.
Yes, I'd probably recommend actually you just like put it into ChatGPT. I don't have it on like a board here, and I also don't have it off the top of my head. To be honest, like personally, I do actually more so like I'll know like what are my standard flop sizes to go for, and then I'll kind of like adjust on turns and rivers, and I'll go for a lot of like overbets on turns and rivers. Because it's like more math and stuff to remember, I haven't leveraged a ton of geometric betting in my personal game. That's something I need to work on. But you could probably generate like some quick like math and like heuristics for yourself. Like for example, if you have like a 10 plus SPR, you're gonna be close to want to go like pot in order to get all the money in on the river. Like this example where you've got 14, I think it's almost exactly. I think I have on the next slide. Yeah, it's like almost exactly pot. So you're going 100% pot on the flop, 100% on the turn, and then 110% on the river. So it's technically a little more than pot in this scenario. And then as stacks get shallower, you don't have to go as much. But I don't know the exact threshold off the top of my head. Yeah. But good question. So going back to, I think somebody had already asked, like, should we ever check on this flop? So no. So that kind of answers the question, like, should we plan to get 3 streets of value? On what runouts do you think, like I talked about the scenario where we want to continue, betting and go for 3 streets of value if it's like a deuce or a 5 and the river, on the turn on the river. On what cards or what runouts do you think we should consider slowing down?
Double pair board. Yeah.
Double pair board, yep. Runner flush.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and then now, yes.
On, let's say a queen comes off on the turn.
Yep.
Are you adjusting your bet sizing to smaller, or are you just checking in position if it's check you?
So if a paired board comes, I would play a little more cautiously because they could have hands like king queen. Probably less likely to have ace queen from the big blind if they just called pre-flop. I would probably still choose the same size that I would go for on the turn, because they also could just have queen X, like you get a lot of value from trips. So I would still go for the sizing, and then depending on like the river, like if a brick river comes, I'd honestly probably still just send it, even if it's just like a queen X, and like if they have king queen, they have king queen, great, but they still have a bunch of hands. Like when thinking back to like what are the worst hands they can call? When a queen comes, now they have a bunch of queen X. Queen 10, queen 9, they have a ton of queen X that isn't like a full house that will be very tempted to call on the river as well. So, yeah.
I think that might also differ whether it's like single raise pot or 3-bet pot.
Yes, yeah, this is assuming single raise pot, we raise pre-flop, and then they just called. But yeah, 3-bet pot obviously changes up the ranges. If they 3-bet us and we just called in position, then they've definitely got, they've got ace queen, they've got king queen, they've got even aces and kings. So they have a lot more value hands as well that we could be crushed by. So that's where we want to play more carefully. Hey guys, welcome. Feel free to just grab a seat. We're just going through today's lecture. There's a couple seats up here. Okay, what do you guys think would be, so we talked about what our value is, so it's pretty clear kind of like what we want to do with value. What do you guys think would be our more natural bluffs on this board? King Jack, King 10, Queen Jack, Queen 10. Okay, so you're thinking pair plus straight.
Pocket jacks, pocket tens.
Yeah, pocket jacks, pocket 10s. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, basically anything that's like blocking the nuts, assuming it doesn't, come like a paired board. Like you're gonna want to contain like a jack or a 10 in your hand. So yeah, pocket jacks to double block, jack 10 or pocket 10s is great. King Jack, King 10 is decent for bluff combos, but also like generally you might just want to check back with these as well because you've got, middle pair. You might just be good if they just have like a queen or something like that and you have like King Jack, King 10. So you don't necessarily need to turn that kind of hand into a bluff. But yeah, those are kind of the hands that you want to have as bluff combos. Okay. Any other questions on this? Cool. So I think so we can kind of cover a bit now. I'll probably cover this as maybe the last slide, and then we'll just go into kind of questions here. But generally, I have like folks ask, and like it's even something I'm saying a lot in my game, which is like, what kind of cards do you generally want to barrel on the turn? When like what's the logic that you generally use? And like some folks have no idea, and they're just kind of like guessing once it gets to the turn. So like generally, when you want to fire the turn is when your equity improves. Right, like either like you pick up equity, like you have a pair that now turns into two pair, or you have a straight or a flush. I think that's pretty obvious. But also generally just when like good cards hit for your range. So we talked about an example when the board is like ace 7 deuce. I mean, you could just have king queen here, right? For example, and like you have like king high, but this is a board that you should be betting on the flop 100% of the time. And then the turn comes like a jack or like a 10. Now you've improved to one, like you have a straight draw. But also this board is generally really good for your range. This is generally a card that you would be continuing a lot on the turn. Whereas if a board pairing card like a deuce or something, if there's ace 7 deuce and a deuce or a 7 comes, these are generally cards that you'll want to shut down on because your opponent will have more trips. They'll also feel more confident if they have just one pair, like to call down with a 7 if a deuce came. So basically covering the concept when your equity directly improves, I think pretty obvious. When you have a better hand now, you'll want to bet more. When scare cards hit, you want to be careful on scare cards because also your opponents could be calling with draws. So depending on the scare cards, but for example, for sure when like overcards land, you'll want to kind of be betting on those if you're the pre-flop aggressor and when you have the range advantage. And often you'll want to check back when equity gets worse or stays flat. The turn will connect with the opponent's range a ton, like as if it was already especially wet flop that you chose to bet, like 5, 6, 7, 2 diamonds, and then another diamond comes, or it's like an 8 or something, and now there's like 4 to a straight, and just like medium strength hands that can't get 3 streets of value. You're gonna often want to check back the turn a ton, and just maybe go for 2 streets, or even just leave it as a 1 street hand. Any questions on turn barreling logic? No? Yeah.
When you fire the turn because a flush draw, it's 3 hearts on the board now.
Sure.
Do you do it regardless of whether you have any hearts in your hand? Or do you, so like talk about that, and then like what happens if someone jams back? Like if we both know, yes, we should fire the turn, we should fire when the flush scary card gets there.
Yeah.
Like if it happens to you, because you're in position, they open with a barrel and you go, oh shit, do you just like jam all in to say, no, I know you're just doing this because you should?
So let me set up the scenario. So you're saying there's 2 hearts on the flop,
Yeah.
and then we just bet the flop,
Yeah.
and then on the turn another heart comes,
Yeah.
and then they check to us again.
No, either you're first act.
Oh, we're out of position now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're out of position. You're saying we just check, and then the in position player bets again.
Yeah, like should you fire, like if you're out of position, should you fire if you're in position? I guess like
Okay.
that's a situation that I always find myself in, where like the scary flush gets there and then someone fires and I'm like, fuck, because like obviously I don't have it. If I have it, I'm comfortable, but like, if you don't have it, then what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll kind of address like step by step. So basically, the scenario that Derek is kind of setting up is like, basically it's like maybe a draw heavy flop, and then the card comes, whether it's a flush or a straight, that completes that draw. And then let's talk about maybe first like in position. What do we do? So if we're the pre-flop aggressor, there was like a flush draw on the flop, and then now a flush completes on the turn. The out of position person checks back to us again. I'm going to be doing a lot of checking, especially if I don't have a heart. If I don't have a heart, then it's more likely that they're going to have some hearts in their hand. So it's a little more likely that they might have a flush, but also because I won't really necessarily have like a card that I can want to continue bluffing on. Because if you're going to want to try to, because if you're going to keep going for like 3 streets, you want to represent the best possible hand, which in this case would be a flush. But if you don't actually have, let's say, the ace of hearts in your hand, like that's a really important card that you want to have in your hand if you want to try to represent that. Because it also means that they can't have the nut flush, even if they have the king of heart high flush. You might still get them to fold because if just by holding that card. So if I don't have any hearts, I'm just checking a lot of the time. If I have a heart and then like a middle strength hand, like a pair, I'll probably still check back to kind of like play cautiously, try to realize my equity and value with like potentially get a flush. So generally speaking, when a scary card comes that's completing like draws, and you're the imposition player, you're gonna want to do a lot more checking. There's definitely gonna be scenarios where you want to bet, like you've got sets, 2 pairs. You've got the nut flush blocker, like I've got the ace of hearts, and I've got like top pair or something. Like you're still gonna want to bet for value. So that's as the in position player. As the out of position player, the default play is you're gonna want to just generally check to the in position player. But this is where it starts to really mix in game theory optimal strategy, where you're definitely gonna want to mix some betting and donking, like lead betting on the turn, because the in position player is supposed to check a lot, so you don't want to lose a street of value. The exact frequency is really going to depend on the flush, like the run out. But like you're going to want to mix a bit. Like I can't even give you like a general heuristic because this part of the game tree I'm not like super studied on, and like I'll just generally personally honestly default to a lot of checking. But if I like manage to make the nut flush, like I might just like bet something small, like I bet 50% and then I go like big on the river. And I've seen it done really well by like a lot of pros. Where you see it a lot actually is on board pairing cards on the turn. So if it was ace 7 deuce and then and they're supposed to bet 100% of the time and then like a 7 comes, especially low board pairing cards, like something 8 or below, because as the out of position player, you're supposed to have a lot more of those like low cards because you're going to be playing all the offsuit variety of those kind of cards out of the big blind. So you can very easily represent trips if like a board pairing 7 comes, or a board pairing 6, or a board pairing 5, and I'll see pros go a lot for like 80% pot on the turn, and then bet big on the river, both with trips, but then also of course with some bluffs.
Sorry, so as a big one, if like, as you say, like those board pairing low cards,
Yeah.
would you prefer like dunking or check raising? Like,
Both are available to you. I think I would try to think about opponent type, and in game theory strategy, like it'll mix with both. Like if you check and then they choose to bet, then it would check raise. If you or you could just choose to donk out. And if you think your opponent's going to be over checking, then maybe you want to bet. But if you think they're going to be over betting, like betting a ton of time, then you can go for the check raise. So that you can play a bit more exploitatively, but you have both available to you as a strategy.
would you also mix like some of like your weakest ranges, like some bluffs, like a complete air which doesn't hit but is beneficial to your range, like say like 5-4 suited or something?
Yeah, so you'd want to have, in what the solver doesn't really like is having like 0 equity bluffs. Like it happens sometimes, but like I would say you generally don't want to have 0 equity bluffs, meaning like you want to have, and like so ace 7 deuce is maybe not as a great example because you're not going to have a lot of like natural bluffs on that kind of board when it's that dry. But let's say it's like 7-6 deuce and then a 6 comes on the turn. You can choose to turn like 8-5 into your like turn like donk, whatever, right? Or like so you can turn like some of your straight draws, like your gutters, or your like low pairs, like 2-3. Is that, no, you wouldn't have like 2-4 or 2-5 or something like that. Actually, I don't think that's even a straight draw, but you get the concept, which is like pair plus straight, like low pair plus straight draw, or straight draws. You start to turn some of those into your bluffs. But I wouldn't take like a complete like 0 equity hand and turn it into a bluff. The solver generally doesn't like that. Yeah, because it just has you picking. Otherwise, like it's gonna be way too easy to overdo it on your bluffs. Like if you start picking out like random hands like queen 3 to start bluffing, like where do you draw the line, right? Are you gonna do that with king deuce? Are you gonna do it like king 4? So it becomes a lot more natural, and it really concentrates a bit more your bluff combos when you actually choose the ones that have a bit of equity. And also it gives you some outs to actually not just like have to bluff on the river. Good question though. Okay. That's basically it for what we had prepared for today. So can open just if there's general questions on like kind of like future street planning, turn strategy. I think I like the questions about like when to like turn donk and turn lead, because we're definitely going to go into that deeper, and it becomes like it's quite, I would say, more of like an advanced strategy as well. So yeah, these are really great questions. Okay, no other questions? Yes.
Do you ever overbet flops?
Yes, you can. So let me see if I have hold on. Let me see if I have a sign on this. Okay, so to this question, like, yes, basically you can kind of segment to like boards that you want to choose for a small size or a big size. And when you choose the big size, you can choose 70% pot, 80% pot, or even like 120% pot. It doesn't really matter as much. It's generally, you know, like you'll be choosing a big size, so you can overbet the pot. And you'll see some players that will just like, if they choose to go for the big size, they'll just always go for like over pot. I personally generally tend to use something like 80% pot. But these are the flops that you'll generally see, like bets for the big size. So kind of like, and actually this was a good example actually, where we showed like the ace, king, queen. So like ace, like basically 3 Broadway kind of cards. You'll have the big size. You also have the small size is more of like the default, but you definitely want the big size as well. Any 2 Broadway boards because this heavily favors us. And then 10 high, like lower dynamic kind of boards. Why do you guys think we have the big size on these? Because this one's probably less intuitive. Like 10, 7, 4, 9, 6, 3, 5, 8, 5, 3.
Well, if they have like ace 8 suited, I don't think they're ever folding.
If we have ace 8 suited, you mean?
Or like if they do, and
if
if we
they have
like
ace 8
queens, jacks, tens, like if we have over pairs, and we know that they have like ace X or
Yeah.
like a combo draw,
Folding their straight draw.
Sorry?
On the flop, they're not gonna fold their straight draw.
6,
It's
7,
also inelastic.
Yeah.
7, 8.
And
Yeah.
we try to maximize the values of overpair. We can wrap in our range.
Yeah. So like basically, yes, exactly. They're gonna generally, if they're gonna hit like top pair, like they have like, let's say on 10, 7, 4, they have like 10, 8, 10, 9. If we have a hand like ace 10, we just get to get a ton of value from them and we outkick them. But also all of our overpairs are gonna want to bet big as well. Like they're just gonna be pretty like inelastic, meaning they're not gonna really be price sensitive. So if we just bet big, like they're still gonna call with all their top pairs. So we just get to extract more value with our ace 10, jacks, queens, kings, aces. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing driving why we want to have a big size on those particular boards. And you're generally going to want to do it with top pair, top kicker, or over pairs. And then like decent bluffs, right? Like you're like 8-9 or like 7-8 with like backdoor flush draws. You'll want to mix in with your big size as well. And then actually, yeah, you see here combos that like the big. Yeah, it's there right here. Pocket pairs and then 2 cards directly over the highest card. Yeah, so like even like your bluffs are even gonna be like on 9-6-3 you just have like jack queen, because you'll have a lot of clear sort of like turn barrels. Like on jack queen, if like a 10 comes, you can bluff. Or like let's say you have like 10 jack. If a queen comes, an 8 comes, you can continue to bet because now you improve to a straight. If you had backdoor flush and any of the flush, like now you have a flush draw, you can keep betting. Also, if a 10 or a jack comes, you can just have the best hand a lot of the time. If they were just calling with a 9, so that's kind of a pretty natural bluff as well. Cool. Great question.
So if the board was like, let's say ace 7 deuce all rainbow,
Yeah.
and you hit a set of 2s,
As a
and-
pre-flop raiser?
yeah,
Okay.
and like in their range they have a lot more ace X.
Why would they have more ace X in their range? If
Oh,
they're
I
there?
guess. Oh, if you're the pre-flop raiser.
Yeah.
Let's say, okay, let's say you call with 2s. I think
Okay.
that would make more sense. Like
Sure.
if they raise with the ace, king, ace, queen.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you're in position, so they would probably bet.
You're out of
Or you're out of
If
position.
you're out of
if
position,
doing that.
you're saying if you're out of position,
Yeah.
you call with pocket 2s,
Yeah.
you flop a set on a7 deuce, really dry board.
Yeah.
So you would check flop. They would bet like 100% of the time, and I would mostly check raise. You probably want to check raise. Like you're gonna want to check raise with your best hands.
Right.
It's hard to have bluffs on this board. Like you don't have any straight draws. Like maybe you have some backdoor flush with like a, but like it is what it is. Like they're gonna have like a lot of. You're not gonna try to get calls from like king jack or 10-9 or something like that. Like they're just gonna fold and you're. It is what it is. But like you're gonna want to get value from like ace king, ace queen, those kind of hands that can call the check raise and then yeah.
Right. So let's say like you're late position and this person is under the gun. They raise.
Okay. And you just call.
Oh, actually. Never mind. I think it's not making sense with the like logic with the positions as well.
Okay.
I was thinking like if you let's say they limped. You bet, say 3-bet, you called. Then in the position, the flop comes ace 7 deuce rainbow. So I guess even
So
then,
it starts to get like, I think these scenarios. I mean, you're gonna see a lot in like low stakes poker where like people will limp and then somebody will raise.
right.
Theoretically, like it just doesn't. You don't really see these scenarios pop up because like people shouldn't be limping in these scenarios. So it's almost like not really worth like discussing from a theoretical standpoint. But like this is gonna be almost like purely exploitative. Like what is this person limping with? Like do they like generally they're probably gonna have a capped range, and then you're saying we have a set of deuces in position. I mean, we probably have just the best hand all the time, so I'm just go like bet with a set. Yeah, and just try to plan to get all the money in.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you do in like your draw? Like, do you plan for 3 streets of value, or how many? Like, let's say you're, when you have I could say a double open-ended straight draw on either side, or maybe even an open-ended straight flush draw.
Okay.
But you've made nothing, right? You know, it's 9-6-3. You have 8-7 suited. 9-6 are suited with you.
Yep.
Would you plan in that scenario for 3 streets of value, or would you like to hope to get it all in because like you know there's so many cards that can either get you the straight or the flush?
I would use that for sure as one of my bluff combos. Yes, because I have so much equity. I mean, you're almost like not even bluffing on the flop. You have the equity advantage even when they have like a pair, like top pair or something like that.
Okay.
So I would bet, and then on like a turn, I would probably continue to barrel on a lot of turns. I mean, you can start to mix for sure. Like you can also check back to try to realize your equity. But if I were to choose like a combination to bluff, it would be one of the ones that is available to you, right?
Yeah,
like
so
you
it's
bet,
you bet at least once on the flop,
Yeah.
and then if the turn misses,
and you
check.
choose to bet again,
Yeah.
and then you wind up with 8 high on the river. I would definitely consider betting again as a bluff, depending on what the river is. If it wasn't like a paired board, if it was something that kind of like favored me, like if they just have a 9 a lot of the time and like an ace comes on the river, I could represent even just like a, you know, like an ace high like flush draw that now just also has like top pair that can kind of go for value.
Right.
So if a good card comes from me that favors my range, I would definitely consider bluffing that. I wouldn't do it all the time for sure. Yeah. Cool. Good questions. I think we're at, yeah, it's like 7:10. Okay, cool. We'll wrap it up here.